Hello, and welcome to the Harvey Heritage presentation series. My name is Cheryl Bartlett, and I am president of Harvey Heritage, located in Harvey, New Brunswick, Canada. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Mary Louise McCarthy Brandt as our guest speaker in commemoration of Black History Month, held every year during the month of February. Mary is a Black community leader, an elder, and is committed to telling the stories of her ancestors. As a sixth-generation woman of African descent in New Brunswick, Canada. In 2020, she received a doctorate of philosophy from the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education of the University of Toronto, with a specialty in social justice. In 2021, she established and became executive director of REACH, which stands for Remembering Every African Cemetery's History in New Brunswick. In 2022, she received an honorary doctorate of letters from St. Thomas University. In 2023, she received the Queen Elizabeth Platinum Jubilee Medal. And now, please welcome Dr. McCarthy Brandt.
Thank you so much. So I really like to start my talk. Everyone can hear me okay? With, if you want to hit the next slide, Cheryl, with a grounding statement. I always like to talk about the land which we have settled on. So I do a little territorial acknowledgement, and I just want to say that the grounds were settled by the Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and the Woolastoqui, which formerly were called the Maliseet people, and that in 1726, that the Indigenous people did a peace and friendship treaty with all of the colonizing fathers that were settling in New Brunswick. Well, actually, New Brunswick wasn't formed until 1784, so that would have been, Nova Scotia. And that the Peace and Friendship Treaty was basically stating the grounds were unceded and unsurrendered, and that they would share the grounds together. So it's important that I start my my topic. The next slide, I think Cheryl basically talked about who I am. I say I'm very committed to telling stories, and I have traced myself back to a woman who was listed here in the Book of Negro. I brought that with me, who left a plantation in Virginia in the U.S. in 1783 and arrived in Nova Scotia. And this particular woman was brought back to New Brunswick when New Brunswick was formed in 1784. She was brought back as the housekeeper, probably enslaved, and the housekeeper of the Isaac Allen family. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Cheryl. So I am going to read a poem. I don't know if I put that in my bio, but sometimes poetry jumps out of me like a fountain. So I have to write it down. So this poem I'm going to open my talk with because it's about my sixth great grandmother, Sabina. And I'm actually reading from my dissertation, which you can have a look at if you'd like after. Anyway, the poem is called Sabina. Sabina, 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 I thank you for supporting me thus far. I know you are with me. I feel your presence. This task is so great to do on my own. I know your weary body is at rest and you have traveled far. Sorry, I'm just going to open my water. I wish I could selfishly kneel at your feet and ask you to share some of your stories. I have but the history, words to share and to learn about you. but in every way I can, I will celebrate and honor you. I have so many questions about you, born in 1748. My, what you have seen, what you have endured. I want to thank you for the risks you took, my beautiful grandmother. Thank you for taking the risk to leave Virginia and the Stratton Manor plantation. Thank you for boarding the ship, the Betsy. And I hope the Allen family treated you well. I write these words to your honor and to your highest regard. I know you are with me. I feel your presence. I am blessed to be here, and I thank you for your guidance. So that is a tribute to my fifth grade grandmother. And next slide. So when Cheryl asked me to come and speak, we were toying with what the topics were, and she said, sorry, she said she'd like to hear about REACH and how it came to be, and also about the graveyard that was underwater due to the McCarthy Dam not relocating the black graves. So REACH is a nonprofit. As in my bio, Cheryl said, I finished my PhD in 2020, and then I kind of felt like I still had so much work to do, and even though researching and writing this dissertation, I couldn't stop my mind from thinking, I need to do more. So, and I will read the topic of my dissertation. My dissertation said, topic is listed as segregated in life and in death, a Black woman's critical exploration and narrative account of early African descended communities and graveyards in New Brunswick. So for this dissertation, I focused on 6 graveyards, 5 of which showed evidence of segregation and neglect. So I finished my dissertation in December of 2020, and I formed this nonprofit in April of 2021. And I had my friends, we were trying to figure out an acronym and what it was going to say, and we settled on REACH. And I went to a graphic artist and I dreamed about these hands, multicolored hands, coming up over the mountain, holding a piece of kente cloth. And so this is what the graphic designer brought to the table from my vision. And so remembering each African cemetery's history. And it's important to state that the focus and the goals, the next slide please, Cheryl, of REACH is kind of twofold. And the main mission is, of course, to eradicate the erasure of New Brunswick Black history. Who is telling the history of Black New Brunswickers? Who's recording the history? Do we depend on the archives to do all of our recording? Because I think I heard we're all kind of genealogists in this room. So we certainly need the support of the archivists, but what's been unfortunate, what's been unfortunate is that for our archives, the provincial archives, and I'm sure across Canada, that the Black history is only recorded when it is a negative occurrence. Someone shot someone died, someone drowned, someone was drunk and fell out of a bar, or like just a lot of negative situations to my beautiful Black community. I grew up in Woodstock. I was one of 9 children. My mother was one of 13. So our family was multi-generational all the time. So I grew up with people quilting, baking bread, getting ready for church, making clothes, just multi-generational. So I want to sing the praises of my community, and I hope to do that from my dissertation and from REACH. So as I said, our main mission, the first one is to eradicate the erasure of New Brunswick Black history. And the second is to document, find, repair, and create a database for all Black graves in New Brunswick. You know, when I was in Toronto and had started my PhD, I constantly had to defend to people that there were Black people in New Brunswick. They said, oh no, you must mean Nova Scotia, like telling me where I'm from. I go, no, I am a proud Black New Brunswicker. And so when I found my supervisor, you know, she said to me, you speak of such praise of your community. I've never seen it so strong. And I said, well, my life was filled with love and enrichment. And I said, I am seeking to tell those stories and to reinsert healthy narratives in our libraries about our ancestors. And like Jennifer Dow, I've learned so much. I'm a few years older, but I've learned so much from Jen, you know, because her focus, she's phenomenal. Not even going to say what her focus is, because she's got so much knowledge. And a genealogist, I say she's got golden fingers, because she can find things, and I really don't have the patience for that. I'm more broader, but I celebrate Jen and so thrilled that she's part of our board for REACH. Okay, something else I wanted to say and I forgot it. So, so that's kind of concluding the formation of my nonprofit REACH in New Brunswick. And I'm going to now move on to the next slide, which I'm going to talk specifically about the old Negro cemetery. And, you know, I became aware of this cemetery in the 90s. There was a letter written in the Daily Gleaner. My mother read that and she said, take me to Fredericton, in Woodstock. It was the early 90s. And I said, okay, Mom, where are we going? She goes, I want to visit the cemetery. I said, okay. So we went to Fredericton. You can change the slide, please, Cheryl. And we went to Fredericton and we tried to find the stone. There was supposedly a stone commemorating the early Negro settlers of the Upper Kingsclear area. We couldn't find the stone, and we then, my mother had the name of a person who'd written into the Daily Gleaner, and I don't know how we found her in the 90s, but she was just up off the Trans-Canada Highway. We were able to meet with her, and she told us a bit about what happened, and that kind of just sort of, I pushed it to the back of my mind and went on about my life. And then in the mid-90s, late 90s, there was a family reunion at the hotel, which I don't know what it's called now, but there's a hotel right at the corner there of Kingsclear and what's it called?
Is it called the Riverside?
I think
It's
that's
right at
what
the
it is
dam,
now.
yeah.
Is it open now? Or
No, it's
No,
closed.
not open right now.
Yeah. So anyway, there was a family reunion there. And I think in conjunction with King's Landing, because we had meals and stuff there. And my cousin found the stone. I was telling him about the stone. My cousin David came from Bangor. He said, cuz we're gonna find that stone, cuz we are gonna find it. I said, okay, let's do it. And the stone had fallen face down and was broken in 3 spots. And it was erected in 1968 when the Matchquack Dam started their research and decided what they were going to do to the communities. I mean, we've all felt the pain and growth, I guess, of industrialization, and when the Matchquack Dam was built and communities were lost, and so I know even my own personal story in Woodstock, we lost our home due to the Matchquack Dam and moved over town to another house because the St. John River was going to be raising its water level. I don't know if anyone remembers Woodstock, but do you remember the Island Park in Woodstock? Sure. Yeah. So our home was on the bank of the St. John River, and we could look at the Island Park. And I remember growing up watching elephants in the water, the circus coming to town, and that beautiful island park was lost. But it's funny, I lost my brother, my oldest brother. He was in his early 70s, gone far too soon. But his wish when my brother Art passed was to have his ashes scattered at Island Park. He played ball there, he hung out there, so his children hired a guy with a boat and off they went to, because sometimes when the water's low, we can see things on the park. So he had his ashes scattered at Island Park. But anyway, so I became aware of the old Negro cemetery. And I learned a lot more about it from the archives. And I shouldn't say this, but sometimes white colonial history is recorded much more accurately than mine. I mean, I'm in a new generation now, and I'm trying to retell my ancestors' stories, and it's a double-edged sword because I have to do a lot of research, like in terms of even researching my fifth great grandmother. I had to research the whole Isaac Allen family to hear there was one or two words written about their servant or their enslaved woman who was my grandmother. And she was noted. I found proof of her in an 1834 will where Isaac Allen's daughter, she was called a spinster daughter, had left money, a few shillings for their old servant, Sabina, which would have been my grandmother. That was 32, the probate will. Anyway, I'm kind of dancing around. So I started, once I got the pictures from David Payne and I knew the stone was there, I started visiting it every year. Like in the spring, I'd make sure it was there. I didn't know why, but I just in my mind wanted to know what was going on with this stone, which I couldn't read what was on the front of it because it was face down, but in my mind, I kept a watch on it. Anyway, life went on, and then the highway was twinned, right? And so when the highway was twinned, the old Woodstock Road became prime real estate, right? So people were building on the old Trans-Canada Highway, and I call it Woodstock Road, but it's a bit further out. And so below the dam, there were some beautiful homes being built, and the graveyard that was the Kingsclear Kilburn graveyard sat between these two beautiful homes. So when I checked one year, it was maybe 2000, 2001, for the stone, it was gone. But I could see evidence that it was there. And when I realized it was gone, I thought, goodness, like, what am I going to do? So I went back to my car and I sat and I thought about it. And I'm kind of scared of dogs. Everyone in the country has dogs. And I thought, okay, I'm going to knock on doors, and there might be dogs, but I'm going to knock on doors. And the very first door I knocked on was Laurie Jordan's. And he and Twyla said, oh, we have the stone. We have the stone. Mary, I didn't know you were interested. I said, I have been watching that stone. Laurie said, we're going to form a nonprofit. We've been given the land from the church and the graveyard we're going to improve, because truly they didn't want this rundown graveyard between their two properties, right? They felt it affected their property value. So the two men, he's now passed. It's so funny. Both the men are in that graveyard when we started the graveyard committee. Winston White was one man, and Laurie Jordan and we were founding members of this Kingsclear Kilburn Community Cemetery. And I said to them, you know, I'm only here for my ancestors. And they said, it's okay, we know, we're happy you're here, Mary. So we estimate from the records that there were around 60 to 70 graves that were left in the old Negro cemetery. And how the cemetery was set up, there was the Kingsclear Kilburn Cemetery, which was quite a ways up close to the road. And historically, there was a railroad track that used to go along the water, and below the railroad track was where the black graves were. So what MB Power decided to do, which I got the documents from the archives, was they were not going to move the graves. So all through the files, the words were written, do not touch the Negro graves. So MB Power brought in like one of those caterpillar, like what do you call them? Excavator with a big bucket filled with crushed stone, and they covered the black graves. And then they went back and forth over them, and then, a few weeks later, the water level was raised. So, so my breath in me is advocating for those ancestors. Jen also has ancestors that are there, the apology or what MB Power felt they should do was they built a stone. Created a stone, which they talked about in the documents, in the files, and they kept saying, "Where's the stone?" The stone was supposed to be $275 from the granite company, and anyway, finally, the granite company had said, "Well, if you want less words, we can take $50 off." So this is 1965, 68. So the stone was like $225, and it was such a disrespectful stone. It had no date on it. Most memorial stones would have. In 1968, we erected this. There was no date, and it said, "Herein lies a memorial stone for the early Negro settlers of Upper Kingsclear." And then instead of listing all the names, because remember they were saving money, they listed about 10 or 12 names, and it was like McCarthy, Diamond, Lee, Cox, and just the names, no date of birth or date of death, which I thought was so insulting too, because all of the documents were there in the file. So that was the stone that was erected in the mid-60s. That was the stone I found in 2000. And that stone is now at the front of the Kingsclear Kilburn Cemetery. So we fast-tracked to 2018, 2019, and we decided we would speak again to MB Power and ask them if they would do a proper stone. And they agreed to do that. And I think the bill was maybe $7,000 or so. You can go to the next slide, Cheryl. Yeah, the original monument was established in 1968, but again, it was segregated in the new Kingsclear Kilburn community. So the graves would be here for the white graves, and that stone was segregated over here, and it had fallen and was overgrown. And the problem with the monument, I said it lacked signage, and it was discovered broken. So the new stone was purchased, and Twyla Jordan and myself and Jen Dow, the three of us worked together. Twyla was our contact with MB Power. And when we got the email, it's kind of funny, that MB Power said that they would do a new stone. I foolishly, in my ADHD way, replied to all and said, "Oh my goodness, my ancestors are now dancing up above," I don't know if MB Power appreciated that. But anyway, I was very thrilled. So we do have a new stone, and it's now in front of the Kingsclear Kilburn Community Cemetery, but I'm still seeking a public apology, and I'm hoping that well, I'm in talks with the new CEO, who is Lori Clark. She seems very open, and we'll see if there's going to be an apology or some type of reparations for my ancestors. I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but we are in communication. So the very next page, Cheryl, I'm just winding down, I've got 2 more slides, is now Sarah's mom, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Sarah's mom?
Jane.
Oh, Jane. Jane, sorry, Jane. Jane was saying she read this article, not a very good picture of me, all squeezed up, but there's an article that possibly Cheryl can share that a Black Online magazine did, and they dedicated it. It was just about the old Negro cemetery. And this is a national platform I was very pleased to talk about. And it was published in October of 23. So the next slide, Cheryl, and this is my last slide. And there should be at the very bottom a link for, this is a can you put the volume on or?
The more we uncover about the history of anti-Black racism in Canada, the more we realize how much has actually been hidden. Did you know that in many parts of this country, even cemeteries were segregated by race? In New Brunswick, for example, near the St. John River, white people were buried on higher ground while the bodies of Black folks were buried by the water. In the 1960s, when the energy company New Brunswick Power decided to build a dam on that very site, they moved most of the white graves, but the Black ones, they were left behind and swallowed up by the rising waters. This is Mary Louise McCarthy Brandt. Her great-grandfather was buried there along with many other Black ancestors, and she's fighting for a formal apology from the energy company. When the dam was built, bones were literally washing up ashore. Back then, New Brunswick Power did erect a small gravestone, but McCarthy Brandt recently got them to erect a much larger one with all the names of the people buried there, but still no apology. So what do you think about this? Read the full article on BuyBlocks.com and subscribe to the BuyBlocks newsletter so you don't miss any stories.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So which church did that population go who were buried in that cemetery? Were they affiliated with any church, like the St. Peter's Church down closer to town, or which one?
Possibly, but the St. Peter's has its own cemetery.
Yeah.
And actually, that cemetery is the only one I found in New Brunswick that's not segregated, that the Blacks and the Whites are all buried
Okay, that's what I
together.
wondered, why they hadn't all been buried there, or perhaps it was overflowing, I don't know.
Yeah, no, they're all mixed in that particular cemetery.
Yeah.
But there was a church, a United Church. I think it was Methodist first and then United. That is now a private home on the hill, kind of, going down
Okay.
into Macquac,
Yeah.
into the Macquac area.
Yeah.
And that's where the cemetery belongs to.
Oh, really?
That's
Okay.
how the man, Laurie Jordan and Winston White, got permission to upgrade it and clean it up. And
I know Lori was furious about what had happened.
yes. Yeah, I probably stayed on the.
Who's your celebrity crush?
I probably stayed on the committee more because of Lori.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna see if I can find that. I think we've got time for a few questions, do we, Cheryl?
Oh, yeah, so, yeah.
So was there a list that you must have got everyone who was buried in that graveyard?
Yes, we got a list from the archives. Actually, NB Power had a list that they must have gotten from maybe one of the churches. And that was clearly in the file, but it wasn't used to commemorate the stone. They had the list there. So we were able to use that list, and with Jennifer's research, strengths, we were able to put, I don't know if we had 40 or 50 names maybe. We felt that some of the graves were not registered, some of the deaths, and that, there was perhaps a bit of, I don't know, privacy or fear of going into town to register the death. So a lot of people were buried with just wooden crosses there.
I was going to ask you
Yeah. Yeah, so I brought some things with me. Brought my master's thesis, and that's actually my master's now being in print, and a magazine that I was interviewed for. This is a book that my son helped republish, The Blacks of New Brunswick. And this is my son's book. And then these are two books that I was very thrilled to put a chapter in. This is a book, Letters from the Future. It's how New Brunswick confronted climate change and redefined progress. This was just published in 2020, maybe 2021. And my little story is Flood Memories and Graveyard Parks. I wrote about the old Island Park and the flood and about graveyards. I'm always writing about graveyards. And there. And then this is a book that was published in 2019, I believe, and it's Black Writers Matter. It's a Canadian book of Black writers. And my little essay in here is called okay, my essay is called Diasporic Narratives, Lived Experiences of Canadians of African Descent in Rural New Brunswick. So I write about some experience that I had, not too many pleasant experiences I had of racism in Woodstock, and I also talk about the graveyard situation. Oh, that's that.
So the people in that graveyard, they live all in the vicinity of that graveyard?
Yes, in the vicinity of the Upper Kings Clare area, like along the road, and there was, and remember when the King's Landing was built, apparently that land had some black settlers on it too. And I'm not sure where they were, if they were forcibly relocated, but I'm told, and I've researched, that the plot of land was purchased by the government to give back to the community to have a colonial village, right? The colonial village of King's Landing was given as a gift to, I guess it's a provincial government, right? Because King's Landing is a provincial government entity, right?
Corporation.
Crown Corporation, yeah.
I met Earl Thomas.
Yes, you work at King's Landing, yeah, I know your face. And yeah, so,
And I believe Rainsford Lane was another Black community, was it not?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Spring Hill Road too,
So was it the same thing in all those graveyards, or was it segregated?
yes, yeah. Or we had our own cemeteries. We had our own graveyards. Lots of births were done on private property. Like I look after a cemetery in Douglas called the Weary Cemetery. And I brought this book along because the Fredericton North Heritage Society had written, one of their members wrote a story about the Weary Cemetery. So that was a cemetery in Douglas, and the Wearies owned a lot of farmland. And so they had their own private cemetery, and it got, well, the property got subdivided and subdivided and sold and resold. And so this little 20, maybe 20 stone, maybe even 15 stone, and but we know there's more people buried, was all by itself, chained off on a private residence. And I've been friends with the private residents since the 90s. I'm almost family, I guess, because they allow me to come and go and clean the cemetery, and the historian, or I guess she was once an archivist, Twyla Woodimer. Does anyone know Twyla? She worked for years at the archives. Anyway, she wrote a story, and it's called The Bertha Weary Story. And it was a terrible, terrible situation where Bertha was alone on the farm. Everyone else had gone to town to sell some wares, and she was home with her, I think her 4-year-old son, and she was pregnant. And when the family came back, she'd been murdered. And the only other person, other than the little child, who was the last, he was buried in he was born in 1892, and I think he died in 1972. That was the son who was there when his mother was buried or murdered. And they say that Bertha Weary roams the streets of Douglas, but her stone is just standing so proud and so strong. I was so happy to see that they wrote about her. So what happened was her younger, Bertha's husband's brother, her brother-in-law, was what they called a mute. He couldn't speak or he couldn't hear. He was like sign language.
Yep.
And he'd gone for years to the deaf and blind school, maybe. He studied the Fredericton Deaf and Dumb Institute of 1893. So Twyla has a picture of it. So he was very smart and could sign. And he was accused of killing his sister-in-law. And we'll never know, right? He was taken away by the police at that time. And he was sent, and he was convicted of murder. He was sent to Dorchester, where he lived, I think, not even 10 years, maybe 9 years. He died of pneumonia. It was very, very sad. But Twyla was able to get a hold of the person who kind of looked after the jail, and he had a diary. And so she read the diary and she found evidence of what happened to him. And she wrote about it. Yeah, so that's why I brought this along. The Weary Cemetery.
And,
Area of,
sorry, is that on the Carlisle Road or where is it?
It's off the, I think it's the main road coming, you know, when you do the ring road and
Yeah.
Brookside and go
Yeah.
around and you go straight.
Yeah.
It's on that road.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna get a mint. What's wrong with my little throat? Talk. Someone else had a question? You can.
yeah, I do very well, you're having your rant there. It's always interesting to think about what the livelihoods were of the people who were gone, the white and the black people in Upper Keats there, which is a fair ways out of the town. So do you know much about that? Were they farming people or did they have a whole variety of livelihoods?
They were farming people, I know that. And I know that specifically I know about the Weary community because there's still people around who remember the Wearies living there.
Yeah.
And but some of the research that I found, especially in the church ledgers, they have always put occupation.
Mm-hmm.
So it would say carpenter or, you know, a horseshoer or laborer. So they were a very dedicated farm working community from what I can read and see.
So your grandfather was married?
Great grandfather.
Great-grandfather?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they moved to Woodstock after that? What?
My father, his mother was a Leek and his father was a McCarthy. And my grandfather's father would have been the McCarthy that's buried in the St. John River.
Okay.
And so getting into my parents' love story, which I want my son to write a play about or do a documentary.
Not much pressure there, son.
Yeah, so my parents met in Halifax. My mother was born just outside Woodstock, and in the early 40s during the war, they were recruiting black women. She went to North Preston and taught in the black schools. My father was in the war, World War II, and in 44, he came back to Canada after being injured in Italy. He almost lost his hand. In fact, he had an injury here and he had shrapnel going through his body. So he was at the Halifax Veterans Hospital, or whatever was there for the veterans. And there was a picnic in Dartmouth. And my parents met in Dartmouth. They both were from New Brunswick. And yeah, a year later they were married and they lived in Minto first. My mother was actually born in Minto, I should say. She always teased us and said, "Didn't you know I was a coal miner's daughter?" But my grandfather worked in the mines in Minto. She was a Johnson control. And, yeah, she was born in the Minto area. And of course, they moved to a farm outside of Woodstock. And she went teaching. She met her father. And then they came back to Woodstock to live. Yeah. Yeah, I say to my son, you know, we've got to get this down because I'm not getting any younger.
Nor is he.
So it was your story that was in the Ancients magazine, or was that your
My mother's. Yeah. 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 She was well known in the Woodstock community, and I worked with is Teresa Blackburn. Yeah. I kind of pushed her to publish it. So my mother's important in Woodstock. I want to write her story. So she finally listened to me and published it. Yeah.
So what's your next project?
Ask my son. What's my next project?
Howdy, everyone. I am the son. Currently, we are, as Mom said, we do not want our histories to disappear, and we have realized that we have come across a problem in our digital age. One of many, not just the robots. When is the last time any of you have looked at your family photo album? That is the question. It seems we are outsourcing our material history to Facebook and Instagram, and I don't think we want to bring out our cell phones every time we have Christmas and weddings, and we probably want to bring the books back. So my mother, I, Jeannie, my friend, and Gary Weeks, one of the greatest photographers in Canada, have been going all across New Brunswick, finding 15 Black New Brunswick families who can trace their history back to the 1780s. We have been for over 15 of these families, interviewing them. So we've asked them, what's your oldest relative you can remember? How far back can you trace your history? The Leslie Drummonds, who still live on Willow Road, actually have the deed that King gave to their ancestors of the patch of land back when this was Nova Scotia, before it turned into New Brunswick. So as Mom was saying, we cannot outsource all of this to the archives when our families have done such a wonderful job of preserving our own stories, because it really is a quilt that requires all of our threads to be woven into it. We can't give it all to the government. So when we talk about how to preserve history for the next generation, we do the interviews. We've gone to every one of these families' houses. I write poetry of the moment. Gary Weeks does a group family photo. He takes portrait shots of all of the individuals that were arranged there, and documentary styles of all the people just hanging out, looking at the photo albums. You'd be amazed how excited kids are to see their grandparents at their own age, and what lights up in their eyes when they see, oh, my grandfather looked just like me, and here's how they played out in the streets. We didn't intend this when we started the project, but we've been generating these mini family reunions. We realize the only time we get with family is funerals or weddings. So when's the last time we've even had a group family photo? Phase 1 is complete of this project. We've done all 15 family photos. This book, which we're calling an innovation of the family photo album, is going to be published by Goose Lane, the oldest independent publisher in Canada. Not only that, but because we have over 50, I'm gonna stand up, don't stand up. Over 50 gigabytes of visual data, we have, starting next year in July, 5 months at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery, a giant opening of an exhibition where we're going to be putting these pictures up huge and giant, and we are going to have a show in the Orientation Gallery, which means no one will be able to go to the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in Fredericton, New Brunswick, without being hugged from our heritage to your families. Then, because not only do people not know about Black New Brunswickers, honestly, they don't know about New Brunswickers. Nobody knows anything past Quebec. I guess they just think it's trees. So, in order to educate people on New Brunswickers and Black New Brunswickers, we're going to tour this exhibition across Canada to show everybody and bring the book with us. And it we, raised over $80,000 of funding. We, were able to pay the families, and they were making us homemade alcohol and freezies, and just some good old fashioned New Brunswick stories. We went to one house, the power cut out in all of Riverview. We had to do the whole photo shoot with me just holding my cell phone up while the pizza guy came in and delivered pizza, and we have done it all. And next year, July 2025, we're going to tour it for 5 years across Canada, and we intend in 2030, because we hope the New Brunswick Museum will finally be open by then. We want to bring it there for a permanent exhibition, so we can start bringing people back to New Brunswick and show the Black New Brunswick families are still here, preserving our legacy, which is the name of the project. So
Still here. I had a few
Show up.
brochures so I'm the behind the scenes researcher for his project.
Who is paid, she said she volunteered, she's my mom, capital M, but I was like, okay, I'll raise money to make sure you can get money to, pay for your time.
What might be really nice is if you get other provinces to do similar projects. Has there been any interest expressed in that?
We are going to meet with the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. Apparently, this is, all this stuff is talk. So this next thing I'm about to tell you is not even, we're just talking. But the Museum of Canada in Ottawa is really interested in Atlantic Canada history right now. And so we're going to meet with the curator at the Beaverbrook to see if that can be one of the other places we can go. And everywhere we've talked about this project, they're really interested in the methodology. It's not just taking family photos, it's also asking them for essays. It's also putting poetry to moments. It's also scanning in their documents. I was in the Orchid Long-Term Care Facility in Gagetown, in the back room of this place, scanning on top of the toilet, scanning old family photos, because one of the members who lives in Montreal, but was raised in New Brunswick, he wanted his 93-year-old grandmother to be preserved in this book project. So we go where the families are, and we did a photo shoot of 2, scanned in the photos, took both their pictures in, and had a wonderful conversation. And it's doing 15 families. I mean, you can do 15 Irish families, Acadian families, Indigenous families. Once you get up to 15, it really is a wonderful sample size of just Atlantic Canadian living. So that's why we're saying this is about bringing families together. We're just doing it through a Black New Brunswick lens. And I will not call any more of my mother's time. Shouldn't have even pointed at me.
So when you're finished with all this, which I don't think you'll ever be really finished, but can you come talk to us about it?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
All right. I'm adding you to the list.
There's a brochure about the Still Here project.
Oh, perfect.
Proud mother, I had a few brochures in my wall.
Thank you.
Mary, I've got another question. It's sort of off on the side.
Okay.
While thinking about it and researching cemeteries, did you come across any information on First Nations, especially with respect to flooding of the Mactaquac?
I didn't,
Yeah.
but I have.
Do you think that's like a really lost story, or?
Well, actually, NB Power is now in consultation with First Nations to talk about what happened to the communities along the St. John River Valley.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would affect maybe Kings Clear.
Yeah.
I know I have a very good friend, and her 2 daughters are First Nations. She was married to a Willow-Stockery man. I mean, they're divorced now, but her daughters are very much a part of the St. Mary's First Nations community. And there was a Zoom call to start the discussions about what the Indigenous communities feel that NB Power could do to, I'll use the word reparations, but like to, they don't want me to use apology or.
No.
At
You
least
know.
recognize who they were, where they were.
Yeah, and the injustices that NB Power did, even though I guess they did the best they could at the time, because I was told they did call out to papers and newspapers and town hall meetings. telling people that the water level was gonna be raised and property was gonna be lost. So one of my friends was on the call. And you can keep it. One of my friends was on the call and she said, it was in the preliminary stages and they just want to gather information and that just happened this week. Yeah, so.
What's interesting is one of our friends owns one of the islands just below the dam, and they have decided that they wish to give it back to the people of Kingsclear because they feel it should never have been sold to them in the first place.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very wonderful. Good people. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. What did you say, Vicky?
No. I'm in the wrong profession for sure, but I'm just like, you can't own land.
Yeah.
Nobody owns.
But you can pay taxes on it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we you know, we all are raised to be, I always say, I'm trying to decolonize myself. You know, because I always say that I am a product of my ancestors. And in order to, well, I feel my ancestors wrote this dissertation because let me tell you, I was down and low and just couldn't get through it. But yet I knew I had a story to tell. And I'm not an academic, I'm more of a community person. Academic, I have a very, you know, people call me a scholar, but I don't consider myself a scholar. But I consider myself a community advocate and a Black community elder. And I want to help the next generation to be proud and speak with praise and glory about their communities and their families. So I guess people can call me what they want. I just have to determine what I agree to do and not do. I mean, I bash the archives all the time, but they invited me to do a keynote last year at their national conference. I said, you're gonna pay me what? I said, do what? And I said to the lady, I said, Joanna, I haven't been that kind. She said, Mary, every time you speak, I learn something. It's okay. You do your presentation and we will listen and learn. I said, okay. My son says, Mom, you can do that in your pajamas with Zoom. So I did it from Florida. And they were meeting, and I think PEI at the time. But
I'm glad you're doing the book though, because I find the archives is not perhaps collecting as much material as they used to. And I had, I had written a book about John Messer years ago. I was, what was it, 2009, which is a long time ago now. Sorry?
is that his fiddle we saw?
Yes. Well, no, it wasn't. Yes, that was.
Yeah, actually, he's right over there.
This is But what was so interesting was when I researched that book, the only thing they had of John Messer in the archives was one photograph, because he donated everything to the Halifax archives, which is where he was living at the time. But in the interim, I have tried to give them more stuff, and they've said no, thank you. You know, so it's good that you're putting your research into books that will be available. And
they want to meet. They want our information.
Yeah.
And I have given them some. My mom was the last living elder from the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Woodstock, and it was built 1893 and was sold in the 60s. I had all of my mother's personal documents, and I did give a few documents to the archives, and I'm sorry I did, because I've seen my mother's documents on Facebook, and they're crediting the archives and not the McCarthy family. I don't want to be credited, but my mother should be.
yes,
I have they had a church group called the Colored Willing Workers Club, where they met and they had tea and coffee and they had scripture and they decided who they were going to help in the community and if they were going to put on a bazaar. And I had minutes going back to like the 40s and 50s. And I gave that to them.
And do they still have them?
Oh yeah, they have them.
Good.
But I think, and I was told I was naive, And apparently when you do donate, you have to stipulate how it's shared with the community at large.
Yeah.
And that one thing is you should also state that this comes from the McCarthy family or my mother's estate, which I did not know, nor did they tell me.
Yeah.
But regarding my REACH project, they want to partner with us. They said we could have some type of shared storage on their website
Good.
for our documents and stuff, but we're still, I guess I was gonna say gun shy, but we're still kind of shy. Is that right? Gun shy?
Yeah.
Because we're afraid that our ancestors will lose control of it. Like I have big dreams. I wrote Justin, my email went all over Ottawa, but I wanted Justin to give me funding to start a Black database similar to the military database. So if anyone had a Black relative, they could put the name in. So it could go across Canada and have a Black grave database. And not find your grave or whatever, because all the stuff on that find your grave is incorrect. Jen is always finding errors on that. So anyway, who did I end up with? They kept bouncing me all around and I ended up with your minister, who I don't really get along with. But anyway.
Work for Crown Land.
Yeah. So trying to be political and keep my communications open with the government. Now, we were able to, back in 2022, I was able to petition the provincial government. I wrote many, many emails to everyone from the premier to all the different legislative heads, department heads, and we got Emancipation Day. How do I word it? The abolition of slavery happened in 1834, August 1st. And in 2021, Mr. Trudeau, Justin, proclaimed that August 1st would be an Emancipation Day in Canada. So then all the provinces started making that. So I wanted that for New Brunswick. We were able to do it. Had a few political department heads like Arlene Dunn, who's just resigned, and David Kuhn. Arlene Dunn brought it to the floor, David Kuhn seconded it. We had the whole galleries in the legislature filled with our community and alleyship, and it was passed 30-0. Everyone supported it, and then everyone stood up from the Black community, and whoever was there supporting the Black community, I was crying. I was watching it on Zoom, and I was in Florida crying. So that's something we've achieved. And yeah, we've got a few more things to do. Thank goodness now the pandemic has taught us the beauty of Zoom, right? So I am in Florida, but I'm also just a keystroke away.
And I have one more question. There's a new house at King's Landing, is there not, which is the home of a Black settler?
Yeah, I'm very upset about that.
Okay.
It's not new. It's been there since 2010. It's
okay. Never heard of it before last summer.
Yeah, because they forget about it and they can't get people to work on it. It's the not Hudlin, but what's the family name?
Gordon.
Yeah, the Gordon family. And yeah, like I've heard terrible things that, I mean, people even suggest that the Gordon's house was segregated in King's Landing, but
It's back up.
yeah, and maybe that's how they were potentially living in.
Well, they were on the hill there in above St. Mark's Church. They left their horse too.
Were they? Yeah.
So that's kind of like it's on the hill.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been to King's Landing for a while. But, yeah.
Any more questions or anything for Mary? We so appreciate you coming and
Oh my goodness.
telling us these wonderful stories, and we'll be, I'm sure, watching your new projects and your son's new projects and
Yeah, we're gonna get a book together, and I'm actually working on my memoir, which is gonna have part of my research for my dissertation. I've been in talks with a publisher in Nova Scotia. And that's what I thought my son was gonna talk about, and what I'm doing next is getting that framework of the manuscript proposal ready for me. So.
Just
be
in
announced.
case you should ever have any spare time, right?
Thank you.
She's really bad at retiring.
Yeah.
I retired in 2018. I should have retired in 2010. I've been more busier and,
Yeah.
and doing great things.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up now.